Meanwhile, a fierce diplomatic standoff has broken out between Australia and Russia. A Russian diplomat is squatting just next to the Australian Parliament House. He's occupying land meant for a new Russian embassy in Canberra. The land is just a stone's throw away from the Parliament, and on it stands a small box-like structure, which is where the Russian diplomat is living. He refuses to leave. And tensions between Moscow and Canberra are escalating. Australia is pushing for a new law, in fact, to resolve all of this, because the mysterious Russian diplomat's presence has not just sparked off a diplomatic face-off, but also a national security concern. Our next report tells you more.
This is the site where a new Russian embassy was supposed to be built in Australia's capital of Canberra. Today, it wears a deserted look. There's not much activity around here, except for a lone Russian wolf, a Russian diplomat who is squatting on the land and the small building-like structure it houses. He is seen emerging out of the building occasionally for smokes. And while this is just one Russian man, he has sparked a wider diplomatic standoff between Australia and Russia. Apparently, he's protesting Australia's decision to scrap a lease agreement with Moscow, one that allowed the Russians to build a new embassy at the site. Australia had granted the land to Russia on a lease in 2008. Here's how Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has described the man.
The national security threat that was represented by a Russian embassy on site are not the same as some bloke standing on a blade of grass on the site that we don't see really as a threat to our national security.
A bloke. That's how Anthony Albanese described the Russian diplomat. But Prime Minister Albanese might just be underestimating the threat this Russian diplomat poses. You see, the man enjoys diplomatic immunity, which means Australia cannot take action against his squatting. And if it does, that would trigger an unprecedented diplomatic crisis with Russia. Moscow could respond in a number of ways, expelling Australian diplomats or even snapping diplomatic ties with Australia altogether. Because remember, Russia isn't very happy about what's happening in Canberra. Here's what Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said, and I quote, "Unfortunately for us, Australia continues to move zealously in the wake of the authors of the Russophobic hysteria that is now going on in the countries of the collective West. Australia is trying to be a standout amongst these countries. This is yet another unfriendly action by Australia. We will take that into account. If there are any issues that would need cooperation, we will behave accordingly." Russia has also approached Australia's High Court. It is challenging the Australian government's plan to pass laws that would prohibit Moscow from building the embassy. In its appeal, Russia claims it has already spent $5.5 million on construction of the new embassy. But the Australian government seems confident, saying Russia is acting as expected. Russia's primary argument is that Australia is breaking the law. Here's how Australia's Prime Minister reacted to that allegation.
We don't expect that Russia's in a position to talk about international law, given their rejection of it so consistently and so brazenly with their invasion of Ukraine.
But why is Australia so concerned about a Russian embassy? It says the Russian embassy would pose a threat to Australia's national security, considering how close the embassy is to the Parliament.
The principal problem with the proposed second Russian embassy in Canberra is its location. This location sits directly adjacent to Parliament House. The government has received clear national security advice that this would be a threat to our national security, and that is why the government is acting decisively today to bring this long-standing matter to a close.
The fear is that Russia will use the embassy to spy on Australian lawmakers. As for the man squatting on the land, Australia's police is hesitant to act. How the legal battle between Australia and Russia plays out remains to be seen. But Australia's decision to scrap the embassy lease and the emergence of a Russian squatter have certainly raised tempers in both Moscow as well as Canberra.